The Atlanta sun beat down mercilessly as James Harrison, an African-American veteran, approached the Southern Belle, a popular local restaurant. His uniform, crisp and neat, bore silent testimony to his years of service. As he entered, the cool air inside was a stark contrast to the warmth of his hopeful smile. That smile quickly faded as he noticed the sideways glances and hushed whispers. James approached the hostess, Lauren, who nervously fiddled with her menus. "I'm sorry, sir," she stammered, avoiding eye contact. "But we don't have any available tables at the moment." James glanced around the half-empty restaurant, his heart sinking. He'd faced enemy fire with less fear than he felt in this moment of rejection. Without a word, he turned and walked out, his shoulders slumped under the weight of unspoken prejudice. In the kitchen, Chef Ryan Thompson watched the scene unfold through the service window. His hands clenched into fists, knuckles white with anger and shame. This wasn't the first time he'd witnessed such discrimination in his restaurant, but something about the quiet dignity of the veteran struck a chord. As James disappeared down the street, Ryan made a decision. He couldn't change what had just happened, but he could make sure it never happened again. With determination in his eyes, he called his sous chef, Maria. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but filled with purpose. "It's time we did something about this." Later that evening, after the last customer had left, Ryan gathered his staff in the kitchen. The air was thick with tension as he recounted what had happened earlier. "This stops now," he declared, his voice firm but passionate. "We're going to host a banquet in honor of Mr. Won't that upset some of our regular customers?" Ryan's eyes softened as he looked at his team. "Maybe," he admitted. "But think about your grandfathers, your uncles, your brothers who served. How would you feel if they were treated this way?" He began to share stories of his own grandfather who fought in Vietnam, of the African-American soldiers who faced discrimination even as they risked their lives for their country. As he spoke, he could see the change in his staff's eyes, from uncertainty to understanding, and finally, to determination. "Each dish will be named after a battle or a forgotten hero," Ryan continued, his excitement growing. "We'll create a menu that tells a story of bravery and sacrifice." Maria, caught up in Ryan's enthusiasm, chimed in, "We could do a Tuskegee Airmen, spiced chicken wings, or a D-Day seafood platter." As the team began to brainstorm ideas, the kitchen came alive with a new sense of purpose. They weren't just planning a meal, they were creating a tribute, a way to right a wrong and bring their community together. The next day, Ryan set out to find James. He eventually spotted him sitting alone on a park bench, lost in thought. Ryan approached cautiously, his heart pounding. "Mr. Harrison?" he called softly. James looked up, his expression guarded. "Yes?" Ryan introduced himself, explaining that he was the chef from the Southern Belle. He saw James stiffen and quickly added, "I want to apologize for what happened yesterday. It was unacceptable, and I'm deeply sorry." James nodded slowly, his eyes searching Ryan's face for sincerity. Ryan pressed on, "I'd like to invite you to a special banquet we're hosting in your honor. We want to recognize your service and show our gratitude." Surprise flickered across James's face, quickly replaced by skepticism. "Why should I believe you?" he asked, his voice low. Ryan took a deep breath. "Because what happened to you was wrong, and I want to make it right. Not just for you, but for every veteran who's faced discrimination. Will you give us a chance to do that?" James was quiet for a long moment, weighing Ryan's words. Finally, he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "I've seen a lot in my life, son, both good and bad. But it takes a big person to admit when they're wrong and try to make it right." He extended his hand to Ryan. "I'll be there." As they shook hands, both men felt a spark of hope. This banquet could be more than just a meal. It could be the start of real change. The night of the banquet arrived, and the Southern Belle was transformed. Red, white, and blue bunting draped the walls, and each table bore a small American flag. The staff, dressed in their finest, buzzed with nervous energy. As the first guests began to arrive, Ryan stepped out to address them. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Tonight is about more than just good food. It's about honor, respect, and coming together as a community." He went on to explain the events that had led to this night, not shying away from the uncomfortable truth of the discrimination James had faced. "But tonight," he concluded, "we have a chance to do better, to be better." As Ryan spoke, a hush fell over the crowd. Some looked uncomfortable, others nodded in agreement. Then, from the back of the room, a voice called out, "It's about damn time." Laughter rippled through the crowd, breaking the tension. Just then, James entered the restaurant. The room fell silent for a moment before erupting into applause. James, overwhelmed by the welcome, stood tall, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Ryan approached him, extending his hand. "Welcome, Mr. Harrison," he said warmly. "We're honored to have you here tonight." As James made his way to his seat of honor, surrounded by respect and admiration, the atmosphere in the restaurant had undeniably changed. The night was young, but already, something profound was happening in the Southern Belle. As the first course was served, Pearl Harbor, seafood chowder, Ryan introduced James to the gathered crowd. "Mr. Harrison," he said, "would you mind sharing some of your experiences with us?" James stood slowly, his eyes scanning the room. He saw curiosity, respect, and genuine interest in the faces looking back at him. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. He told of his time in the army, of the friends he'd made and lost, of the pride he felt serving his country, but he also spoke of the challenges he faced upon returning home, the discrimination, the struggle to find work, the feeling of being forgotten. As James spoke, the room hung on his every word. Even the waitstaff paused in their duties, captivated by his story. Among them was Emma, a young social worker who had come to support the event. When James finished speaking, Emma stood up, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Harrison," she said, "I just want to thank you for your service and for sharing your story. I became a social worker because I wanted to help veterans like you. Hearing your experiences, it reminds me why this work is so important." James smiled warmly at Emma. "Thank you, young lady. It's people like you who make a real difference in veterans' lives." As the night progressed, more stories were shared. A World War II veteran in the corner spoke of the beaches of Normandy. A Gulf War veteran talked about the challenges of readjusting to civilian life. With each story, the barriers between the guests seemed to melt away, replaced by a growing sense of understanding and community. As the main course, Battle of the Bulge beef stew, was served, the restaurant buzzed with conversation. James found himself at the center of it all, fielding questions and sharing more of his experiences. He was surprised to find himself enjoying the attention. For years, he had kept his stories to himself, fearing judgment or indifference. But here, in this unexpected setting, he found an eager and appreciative audience. Ryan moved from table to table, explaining the significance behind each dish. "This, Midway, mashed potato medley," he told one group, "represents the turning point of the Pacific War, just as we hope this night marks a turning point in our community." As the evening wore on, James noticed a change in the atmosphere. The initial awkwardness had given way to genuine warmth and camaraderie. He overheard snippets of conversation, people discussing ways to support local veterans, sharing resources, making plans to volunteer. At one point, James caught Ryan's eye across the room. The chef gave him a smile and a thumbs up, which James returned with a nod of gratitude. This night was more than he could have ever expected. As dessert, Victory apple pie was served. James stood once more to address the room. "I want to thank you all," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Tonight has reminded me of the best parts of our country, the parts worth fighting for, the parts that bring us together, despite our differences." The room erupted in applause, and James felt, for the first time in years, truly seen and appreciated for his service. As the banquet wound down, Ryan gathered everyone's attention once more. "Tonight has been incredible," he said, "but it can't end here. I propose we make this a monthly event, honoring different veterans and their stories." The suggestion was met with enthusiastic agreement. Guests began offering ideas and resources. One woman offered to provide flowers for future events, while a local businessman promised to spread the word to other restaurants in the area. Emma, the social worker, approached Ryan with excitement. "I'd love to help organize the next event," she offered. "I have connections with the VA that could help us reach more veterans who need support." James, overhearing this, joined the conversation. "And I'd be honored to come back and share more stories," he said. "Maybe even bring some of my old unit buddies along." Ryan beamed at them both. "That would be fantastic," he said. "This is exactly what I hoped would happen, our community coming together to make a real difference." As the last of the guests left, Ryan's staff gathered around him, tired but exhilarated. "We did good tonight, Chef," Maria said, speaking for all of them. Ryan nodded, looking around at his team with pride. "We did," he agreed, "and this is just the beginning." As they began to clean up, there was a new energy in the air. The Southern Belle had been transformed, not just for one night, but for good. It was now a place of celebration, education, and most importantly, a beacon of hope for veterans who had for too long felt forgotten. Over the following months, the Southern Belle became known throughout Atlanta as a haven for veterans and a center for community engagement. Each month, the Veterans Banquet grew larger, attracting people from all walks of life. James became a regular fixture at these events, his initial hesitation replaced by enthusiasm. He took on the role of mentor, helping other veterans share their stories and connect with resources. His friendship with Ryan deepened, the two men bonding over their shared mission to create positive change. Emma's involvement expanded beyond organizing events. She set up a small office in the restaurant's back room, offering free counseling services to veterans in need. The Southern Belle became more than just a restaurant. It was a lifeline for many who had struggled to find their place after returning from service. The impact rippled out into the community. Other businesses, inspired by the Southern Belle's example, began their own initiatives to support veterans. The local newspaper ran a feature on the monthly banquets, bringing even more attention to the cause. One evening, as James sat with Ryan after another successful event, he shook his head in wonder. "You know," he said, "that day I walked out of here feeling like I didn't belong anywhere. I never imagined it would lead to all this." Ryan smiled, clapping James on the shoulder. "Sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes," he replied. "We just have to be willing to make them happen." As they looked out over the restaurant, now filled with laughter and warmth, both men felt a sense of pride. They had taken a moment of pain and transformed it into a movement of hope and support, proving that with compassion and determination, real change was possible. Just as the Southern Belle's Veteran Support Initiative was gaining momentum, James received some troubling news. During a routine checkup, doctors discovered that he needed surgery to address an old war injury. The news hit James hard, bringing back memories of his struggles after returning from service. When Ryan and Emma learned about James's situation, they were immediately concerned. They knew that many veterans struggled with medical expenses, and they wanted to ensure James received the care he needed. "We should organize a fundraiser," Emma suggested during an emergency meeting at the restaurant. "We've built such a strong community here. I'm sure people would want to help." Ryan nodded, already formulating plans. "We could do a special edition of our banquet, maybe auction off some unique dining experiences or cooking lessons." As word spread about James's situation and the planned fundraiser, the community rallied. Local businesses offered donations for the auction, and volunteers stepped up to help organize the event. However, when James learned about these plans, he was hesitant. "I don't want to be a charity case," he told Ryan, his voice gruff with emotion. "I've always taken care of myself." Ryan understood James's pride, but he also knew the importance of accepting help. "James," he said gently, "remember how you felt that first night of the banquet? How it wasn't just about the food, but about the community coming together? This is the same thing. It's not charity. It's family taking care of family. James fell silent, torn between his need for independence and the warmth of the community he'd become a part of. As the date of the fundraiser approached, he wrestled with his feelings, unsure whether to embrace or resist the outpouring of support. The night of the fundraiser arrived, and the Southern Belle was packed. The air buzzed with excitement and anticipation. James, still conflicted, sat at a table near the back, watching the proceedings with a mixture of gratitude and unease. As the event progressed, Ryan took the stage. "Tonight," he began, "we're here to support one of our own. But before we continue, I think there's someone who'd like to say a few words." He gestured towards James. Surprised, James slowly made his way to the front. Looking out at the sea of familiar faces, he felt a lump form in his throat. I'm not great at speeches," he started, his voice rough with emotion. "For a long time, I thought asking for help was a sign of weakness. But being here, being part of this community, it's taught me that true strength is in supporting each other." As James spoke, sharing his fears and insecurities, the room listened in respectful silence. Many nodded in understanding, some wiped away tears. Suddenly, a voice called out from the crowd, "You're not alone, brother." A man stood up. "John, a regular at the banquets. I've been where you are, scared to accept help, feeling like less of a man. But let me tell you, accepting support from your community, that's the bravest thing a soldier can do." John's words seemed to break a dam. Others began to stand, sharing their own stories of struggle and support. The fundraiser transformed into a powerful testament to the strength of community and the healing power of vulnerability. As the night drew to a close, James found himself surrounded by a circle of support, both literal and figurative. The fundraiser had exceeded all expectations, not just in terms of money raised, but in the bonds strengthened and the barriers broken down. Ryan, watching from the side, felt a sense of awe. The Southern Belle had become more than just a restaurant or even a veterans' support center. It was a beacon of hope, a place where the wounds of the past could heal through the power of understanding and togetherness. As the last guest departed, James turned to Ryan, Emma, and the others who had become his chosen family. With tears in his eyes and a smile on his face, he simply said, "Thank you for everything." And in that moment, they all knew that while challenges would always come, they would face them together, stronger for the bonds they had forged and the community they had built.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.